This small video will give you instructions relating to the Pete's Pavers sheet that you have and what you're meant to do. Okay, the paths and the pavers. To create a path, Pete needs to lay a number of pavers. On the sheet there are diagrams to show you how many pavers it takes for length of path. Your job is to work out the relationship or the pattern between the number of pavers and the length of the path. This will be a linear relationship, a bit like we've done in the past, but instead of using x and y, you're going to be using the length of the path instead of x and the number of pavers instead of y. So let's look at an example. We're going to be using pavers that are 250 mil by 250 mil. They're actually half the size of the ones that Pete is using on his sheet, but I'm doing these just for an example. So for a 1 meter length of path, the paver pattern would look like this. There's 4 along because they're 250 mil, so it takes 4 of them to make a meter, and we want 2 rows of pavers to make our path. So we can see here that we've got 4 plus 4, we've got 8 pavers for 1 meter of path. For a 2 meter length of path, the pattern would look like this. We've got our 8 pavers to make up the 2 meters, and we've got our 2 rows of pavers to make up the pathway. So for a 2 meter length of path, there would be 16 pavers. Now, we need to be able to predict the number of pavers for a length of path, and you should be able to work out the pattern of pavers without having to do a diagram for every single path that you're going to, or that Pete is going to construct. So to do this, we need to first of all work out a table of values, and the first 2 values have been taken from the diagrams on the last slide. So if we have a look at our table of values, we've got 1 meter of path takes 8 pavers. You can see this is, instead of x, we've got length of path, instead of y, we've got number of pavers. So 1 meter length of path is 8 pavers. 2 meters of path is 16 pavers. Can we see a relationship between these numbers? Well, it probably shouldn't take you too long to realise that the number of pavers is 8 times the length of the path. So 1 times 8 is 8. 2 times 8 is 16. So therefore, we should be able to work out how many pavers for 3 meters, and that's going to be 24, because 3 times 8 is 24. So what's 4 times 8? 32. That tells us the number of pavers for a 4 meter length of path. And finally, for a 5 meter length of path, we need 8 times the length for the number of pavers, and that's going to be 40. So there's our relationship, or our pattern at least, in our table of values, and we need to work out then what is the relationship between the length of the path and the number of pavers. Well, if we look at that, we can see that the number of pavers is 8 times the length of the path, and that is the relationship that we have. That's our linear relationship. We could even do a graph of this to show where our for a length of path how many pavers would be required. And as I've said, this is the linear relationship between the number of pavers and the length of the path. The other thing you'll need to work out is the length of timber edging. You can do this in the similar way that we've done with our pavers for the paths, each pathway. So you need to complete the table of values first, working out the pattern of numbers, and then work out the relationship between the length of the timber edging and the length of the path. To finally do the quote, once you've worked out the equations for each of the relationships, you can then work out how much each paved area or path will cost. Mrs. Kent wants 2 pathways and a barbecue area. You will need to use the equation for the number of pavers and the length of timber edging to find out how much the materials will cost. You will need to work out the labour by how much it costs to lay each paver. Add all the costs together and you can work out the cost of the job for Mrs. Kent. That's basically what you're being asked to do on the sheet.